Welcome to the Planeswalker Project.
So 1,000,000 years ago, when this channel was still relatively new and we'd just begun covering deck lists, I had done a terribly cringy video featuring Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. That was one of the first EDH decks I'd ever built, and now, nearly a year later, I've begun to revisit some of my old lists, and I've worked on improving them. Lately, I've begun playing a lot of Chimera Enchantress, and it's become one of my favorite decks. The deck features a lot of powerful hate enchantments to restrict an opponent, so I found a lot of new strategies for Grand Arbiter. So let's take a look at this new build, shall we? For those of you who've never seen or faced Grand Arbiter before, let me give you a quick lowdown on how he works. He makes our spells cheaper to cast, and he makes our opponent's spells more expensive to cast. We use various cards to tax our opponents while building up an increasingly impregnable defense. This type of strategy can be called a Pillow Fort style deck. In multiplayer games, you can also use politics to help keep the heat off of your board, as not a lot of players will have or want to spend the resources needed to hit you. Starting off, let's talk about the cards that we're going to use to oppress our opponent's board states. Aura of Silence makes opposing artifacts and enchantments cost 2 mana more, putting them a little further out of reach for opponents. And in a pinch, we can sack it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Authority of the Consuls not only gives us life gain with every creature an opponent puts into play, but it also forces all of those creatures to come in tapped, so no hasty swings allowed, thank you. Blind Obedience gives us a similar ability, but it also comes with Extort, which can be used to ping each opponent and give us some life gain. Also, as a quick side note, since Extort has a hybrid mana symbol in its reminder text, and reminder text does not influence a card's color identity, we can run it in a commander deck that does not run black mana. Karmic Justice will deter any potential destruction of our cards, lest we return the favor and blow up any permanent an opponent controls. Nevermore is a criminally underrated card in Commander, being able to flat out say no to a card. Use it on someone who relies heavily on their commander or runs a card you know will cause trouble. Ristic Study offers us plenty of card draw, provided our opponents choose to not pay the tax. In a game with multiple players, you can quickly rack up cards in hand as your opponents play out their hands. Stony Silence is a potent off-button to any mana rocks that can wreak lots of havoc on a lot of decks. Torpor Orb shuts off any enter the battlefield triggers, but it does not affect cards such as Ulamog that have abilities that activate upon cast. Aven Mindcensor offers perhaps my favorite effect on the board. When an opponent goes to search their library, using say a fetch land, we can flash in the Aven Mindcensor and they will only be able to look through the top 4 cards of their libraries. That will crush a lot of tutor ability in a lot of players' game plans. Add an Alien Arbiter to further punish an opponent for wanting to search through their libraries. Now, for pillows, we run the Classic Propaganda and Ghostly Prison, both functional copies of the same powerful effect. Again, opponents are going to have a lot of trouble getting any damage through if they're spending too much mana playing things to be able to pay for the tax, which is good for us. To further the tax to attack, we run Sphere of Safety, which given the nearly 24 enchantments in this deck, will give us plenty of protection from attacks. Norn's Annex gives us a rather nasty pillow to protect ourselves with, giving an opponent the option to either pay 1 white mana or pay 2 life per creature. Facing an opponent who has absolutely no way to produce white mana will result in some heavy life loss on their part should they want to swing at us. As a side note, with the changes to Commander that happened a while back, if you run a land such as City of Brass that has the ability to produce any mana color, even if your commander does not have that color in their identity, you can still produce that color of mana using such a land. And this applies to other kinds of permanents as well, such as Chromatic Lantern. Moving on, Crawl Space will limit attacks to only 2 at max, if your opponent can even afford to attack with that much. Archangel of Tithes offers powerful tax effects for both our opponent's ability to attack us, as well as their ability to block our attacks. Now I know what you're thinking, how do we win with this deck? All we do is suppress our opponent's ability to play their cards and attack at us. Well, this deck has a number of win conditions that are very potent and very awesome. In addition to outlasting our opponents with our shenanigans, we run cards that will result in us getting a win for being able to remain untouched. Azor's Elocutors gets a filibuster counter with each upkeep. If we take damage, which in this deck is not really a goal we want to have, we remove a counter. If we reach an upkeep where it has 5 or more filibuster counters on it, we win the game automatically. End of story. Next game. Next we have Felid Our Sovereign. This cat beast thing has lifelink and vigilance, allowing it to swing and defend while netting us life. If at the beginning of our upkeep we have 40 or more life, we automatically win. The deck has a small degree of life gain as a sub-theme, as we can see in cards like Test of Endurance, another win condition that will give us the win if we have 50 or more life. Given cards like Drogskull Reaver and the aforementioned Sovereign giving us life gain, that shouldn't be too difficult. And while it does have a slight potential to backfire, Celestial Convergence will award the win to whichever player has the most life once the final Omen counter is removed, which most of the time will be us, but it does have the potential to give an opponent the win should they be playing some kind of nonsense to get more life than us. And in addition to our life gain strategy, we run 2 cards that will provide us with a sufficient fighting force: Luminarch Ascension and Sigil of the Empty Throne. Ascension is a great way to throw up a lot of angels once we get that pillow fort built up, being able to churn out tokens once we hit 4 or more quest counters. Sigil of the Empty Throne works in tandem with the sheer number of enchantments we run, giving us another angel token with each one we cast. Soon we'll have a whole army of angels ready to swing in over anything on the ground for the victory. Our last group of big spells is our removal package, which is key to our deck being able to fend off threats and play political theater with our opponents. We can use our removal spells to help opponents we want to make alliances with, and help remove any potential enemy at the table. Banishing Light and Oblivion Ring are your standard removal, as the slightly better Detention Sphere and Grasp of Fate. I personally like Grasp of Fate because it acts as a bit of an exponential Oblivion Ring. For the more opponents you have at the table, the more powerful effect this card has. Quarantine Field also gets better the more mana we can ramp into it, and it can remove a number of threats. Stasis Snare can be cast at instant speed, making it perhaps the most powerful and flexible Oblivion effect in our deck. Wrath of God and the uncounterable Supreme Verdict will also clear the board of any creatures, and while these 2 will kill our creatures, we can rebuild our board much more easily after a board wipe. The classic Cyclonic Rift is great at wiping opponents clean out of the game, making for a perfect finisher. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are both good options for spot cleaning threats. Yeah, sure, the opponent can search for a land with the Path, but did I mention we run Leonin Arbiter and Aven Mindcensor? Good luck getting any value out of my Path. Lastly, we get Counterspell and perhaps my favorite counter of all time, Render Silent. The deck features a couple of tutors which will help us grab for our enchantments when we need them. Academy Rector will get us an enchantment straight to the battlefield. Enlightened Tutor, Idyllic Tutor, and Plea for Guidance all shoot for the enchantments right away. Finally, let's talk about our mana base. We're in 2 colors, so our mana fixing isn't nearly as complex as some other decks. We will run the standard Hollowed Fountain Shockland, as well as a number of dual lands: Azorius Chancery, Azorius Guildgate, Glacial Fortress, Mystic Gate, Port Town, Prairie Stream, Skycloud Expanse, and Temple of Enlightenment are all perfect includes to get both blue and white mana on the table. For mana fixing fetches, we run Flooded Strand, Windswept Heath, and Polluted Delta. We also run Celestial Colonnade, which is a very powerful main land that can turn into a flying vigilant 4/4 elemental. Mistveil Plains acts as good recursion for any card that might make its way to the graveyard that we kinda need in our deck. Serra's Sanctum will give us a ton of white mana the more enchantments we have. Yeah, it's rather expensive, but this deck will definitely love the sheer amount of ramp that this card offers us. And lastly, Maze of Ith can be used to protect ourselves, or we can play a little political and save an opponent from getting their game destroyed. Our Grand Arbiter Augustin deck has come such a very long way since we first put it together. I feel this list is far more powerful and refined than it had ever been, but I would love to hear your feedback on it. What do you think of the build we've presented today? Do you feel we go a little too heavy on taxing your opponent? And are there cards that you think we should run? As always, we're going to include the full deck list of this new build down in the description of this video. Is there a commander that you'd like to see us cover in the next profile? Or is there a commander we've already covered that you'd like to see us revisit and improve upon? Let us know in the comments as well. And I hope you enjoyed this video.